Welcome. We are joined by Micah Brown, the staff attorney at the National Agricultural Law Center at the University of Arkansas. Hey, we appreciate the time and Happy New Year.
Dave, I appreciate y'all having me, and Happy New Year to you.
You will be road tripping to Iowa to talk about what you're seeing on a national scale with foreign land ownership, among other things. And this is your day to day watching these trends. What sticks out to you?
Really, the biggest thing that sticks out is particularly in 2023, we had such an influx of states having some kind of proposal to restrict certain foreign investments in land. A lot were specifically tailored to agricultural land, like it is historically with these types of measures. Um, so this issue really kind of started reemerging in 2021, 2022 legislative sessions. We had about 12 states in that 2-year period. We come over into 2023, we have approximately 36 states that have some kind of proposal. And this issue really traces back to the founding of our nation, but hasn't really been an issue since the late 70s, 1970s. And with this reemergence, we had a lot going on in 2023. And a lot of these proposals were tailored towards what I call the big four. It's China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Were traditionally, or what I call traditional foreign ownership laws, really kind of were a blanket, more generalized restriction. So it applied to all foreign nations, whether that be China or Canadian investments. So a lot going on in 2023.
And of course, we know Canada is far more likely to own land in our country than China. If you see that last USDA report, it showed that foreign land ownership has ticked up nationally. However, China, as a chunk of that, its share of that has actually gone down. Now, does that mean that this concern about China, is it overblown, or is this a direct result of these states that you've mentioned here being more aggressive in trying to restrict Chinese ownership?
I guess I'm not a complete expert in that area and looking at this, and there are economic elements to this and political elements as well. I can say that really China has had a small sliver of this private ag land ownership. In the U.S., there was a large uptick in Smithfield Foods acquisition back in 2012, 2013. So foreign having these kind of pieces of legislation was an issue in Missouri back in 2012, 2013, but nationally it really wasn't. And then we, come into 2023 where a lot of these bills that are being enacted are specifically restricting Chinese investments. And so maybe with the spotlight on these types of investments, reporting to USDA through a FIDA, maybe we're becoming more accurate, or they're updating their filings, and we see that as a result in the most recent USDA FIDA report, where these companies have gone back and say, actually, we don't own this anymore. We need to update this. But at the state levels and the state and even the federal level, the purpose that these legislators are stating for enacting these or proposing these types of restrictions are national security threats, specifically to our foreign adversaries of the U.S., which include obviously Chinese investments. And so really statistically, it doesn't look like there's that, it's such a small sliver, but that is still the purpose behind proposing these measures. Even coming into 2024, these states are claiming, this is a national security threat, and we're going to propose these measures to restrict these types of investments. So lots going on here.
So how complicated does the language get? We as Americans, we have a fundamental right to own land, right? But does that right extend beyond our borders? Is that where this gets complicated?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. That is a good question. The Supreme Court actually has not, I guess, conclusively decided on what types of rights, people that are not individuals and businesses that are not actual, even temporary residents, what kind of land rights they have in this country. And so there have been a few Supreme Court decisions that have kind of, tiptoed around that, but they haven't got into it yet. So it'd be interesting to see maybe a case that is dealing with that, especially for, entities and individuals that purchased land before these laws went into effect and happen retroactively or enforcement retroactively, like we have in the state that I am in Arkansas this last year, back in October, November, with Syngenta, purchased the land back in the 80s, and now Arkansas is, enforcing this new restriction that they enacted last year on a company that legally bought land back in the 80s. So that would be pretty interesting to see.
That seems like that could be an issue that gets tied up in the courts for quite some time, or do you see that this will be figured out in some other way?
I'm really not sure. I could see where legal challenges would come from these laws. There is was a case. I'm not sure the status of it coming in 2024, but down in Florida, where they enacted a foreign ownership law in 2023, Sheen v. Simpson, and their law was pretty interesting. It had three kind of separate restrictions. One was ag land specific, one was near military installations, and one was specifically directed towards Chinese individuals and Chinese entities that are domiciled or established in China. And a group of Chinese citizens that had temporary, resident status in the U.S. challenged the law. The judge in that case said, pretty much you're not going to win this in my eyes that you see, because technically you're not domiciled in China right now. You are actually domiciled in the U.S. So the restriction does not apply to you. So we have seen a challenge to one of these modern foreign ownership laws. And so I guess time will tell if there will be more challenges.
Is it most likely that we will see most of the efforts done on a state by state basis? Do you see, especially with the dysfunction that we've witnessed in Congress, and we have two parties kind of split control and all that, now we have an election year. Do you see this taking a federal form of some form, or should we really be paying more attention to on the state level?
Like I said earlier, this issue goes back to the founding of our nation. Was actually one of the reasons we broke away from the crown, and early jurisprudence put land law and the laws that dictate land and property ownership to the states. And so that's why we've seen foreign ownership laws at the state level throughout our history. Back in 2020, 2021, we see Congress, proposing bills at a federal restriction. And then we had the national defense spending measure. The Senate actually passed a restriction in their version of the bill. The House actually didn't pick it up. And so, but we saw that we had some bipartisan support for a restriction at the Senate. And so we could see more. There's, Congress is still considering a federal restriction. But, a lot of things have not moved. I will say that, we have this farm bill extension, some kind of appropriations or farm bill piece of legislation could be a vehicle for enacting a federal restriction. So we might see that coming into, I guess, 2024 or whenever the extension goes to, maybe 2025, 2026. We don't know.
Whenever they get into it.
Whenever we get a farm bill, but we might see something there. But for right now, the state there, that's where the activity is going on.
Can you give us an idea about the complexity when you're dealing with this topic? Obviously, back in the day, you law clerked for the Attorney General's office in Arkansas, and you have the background in all of this. But how complex is this matter when they're trying to decide whether a state, let's just focus on the state, but whether a state can actually ban a foreign-owned entity from owning land, and particularly to the point you mentioned, if they already own it, if they already bought the thing years ago and you're trying to retroactively do something, how complex is that to wade through?
It would be pretty complex to look at that. And of course, state legislators can enact laws that are retroactive to extent. And so that kind of specific issue would most likely need to be fought out in court right there. But language-wise in these bills, I've seen a broad swath of states that have active laws. Some are, use very detailed language, getting to that nitty-gritty, and then some are pretty one-pagers, pretty simplistic. Idaho enacted a law last year that was, kind of one page, and like, this is who's restricted, and this is, what it is. Some states don't include penalty and enforcement provisions. Alabama was one that enacted last year. Some things that need to be, included to actually enforce these measures. And that's where some of the complexity comes in, like who's actually going to enforce this law? What are the penalties attached to it? When you exclude that language, don't include it in the measure that you enact, it's kind of like, okay, who's actually enforcing this? Is there actually teeth to this measure? So some of these laws can get pretty complex. How does it actually apply, especially when there's no express grandfather clause? Law that says, hey, if you own the land before this date, you're good. You can keep owning it. We're not going to come after you. But when you don't include that kind of language, complexities arise with, no language at all on that matter. Say, okay, who can we actually go after this entity that owned land legally before we enacted this law? So that's where complexities come in. So it's complexities with the language of the law, and then complexities that could arise with not including language in your law as well.
So are some of these legislatures now reaching out to the Law Center for advice on how to clean this up? Because you've mentioned that you've got some of these states that have failed to put in some what sounds like pretty vital provisions about how this would be enforced. So are they now trying to get back? Are they going to have to go back in there this year in their legislative session to try to strengthen that and specify that?
I believe that, some states, there are a handful of states that pre-filed proposals before coming in for this 2024 legislative session. Other states and lawmakers and, individuals on the campaign trail have stated plans to have some kind of proposal that they would like to see if they, won their governorship in their state. So, and I have also testified in front of a few states during this off season over foreign ownership. Nebraska and Mississippi and Georgia are three states that specifically, I went and spoke and testified, and then actually the director of the center, Harrison Pittman, went and testified for the Senate Ag Committee on foreign ownership as well. So looks like we have, federal level looking at it, lots of states looking at it, and specifically Mississippi and Nebraska do have law on the book. They have foreign ownership. So they're definitely two states that are taking a look in 2024 at, amending their law or tighten up their law to have more specific restrictions. So we're going to see quite a few states, likely having the law center come testify or speak to a group on these laws.
As you're traveling around to these states to go in there and testify, what types of questions are they asking you? What are they trying to figure out from you?
Biggest question I get is unintended consequences with these laws. They really want to know, you know, agriculture that as an industry is kind of the quiet giant of our economy. And, you know, when you really do something that could impact ag land, it could have a lasting effect, not just in agriculture, but the economy, the whole economy of that state. And, you know, if you do enact a restriction, you have to think about what other industries could be affected. And we have lots of car manufacturers that, you know, they need a lot of land, and they might not feel welcome in a state that has some kind of restriction. Ag-wise, you think of these crop protection companies, the seed and feed companies. If there's a restriction, you know, they need ag land to develop their product. And so that's why we see Syngenta getting kicked out, one of the entities there in the Delta in Arkansas. You know, they're a crop protection company and they are getting kicked out. So you could see some of that you know, impact the economy there, especially locally or statewide. You know, you think about what's going to happen when actual U.S. citizen, a U.S. farmer wants to sell their land to someone. That's another unintended consequence. You might not have the same pool of buyers if you have some kind of restriction. So it's not just actually restricting certain investments. You know, there's a world outside of that, and it doesn't just include agriculture.
So many factors they have to look at. Hey, we really appreciate the time and look forward to hearing you on the panel in Des Moines at the Land Investment Expo. Thank you much.
I appreciate you, Dave, for having me, and I look forward to it too.